Good evening, class. My name is Jared Brannon, and this is a podcast about having a difficult conversation. I definitely thoroughly enjoyed this aspect of being able to interview someone and having a difficult conversation. I interviewed a lady that I work with. Her name is actually Leslie. Um, and so just coming into my work, I already knew that I had some different beliefs, ideas, and we come from different cultures. So I thought that this would be a really good person to interview. And so I started off the conversation just talking to her, just trying to kind of open up, get the conversation started. And as we were going through, it seemed like she just wanted to stay on the religious aspect of the conversation, which I was okay with. I'm a very religious person, so I thought that for me this would definitely be a difficult conversation just because I knew that we had very different beliefs. So I then went on to ask, why did you decide to really stay on the subject of religion? And a couple of things that she brought out is because that she felt that this was kind of one of the most under discussed subjects, that it affects all of us, and yet we're really not allowed to discuss, interview, question, or even bring it out in the open. And challenging it is really not even a safe thing to do in our country today. It's almost kind of like a taboo subject, and nobody wants to discuss it. So she's actually an atheist, and she was a very religious follower until probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and so she switched from very religious to non-religious. So then I went and asked, of course, so you say that there's no God. So she goes in to say, yes, that she's 99.99% sure there's no God based on the evidence that has been presented to her so far. Something a lot of people say, she said, if tomorrow suddenly there is something that just descends from the sky and tells me, hey, idiot, I'm here, I will change my mind most likely. She said, I'm 45 years old. I have not seen any evidence in my life or anybody else's life. Nobody has even proposed any evidence to me. So the existence of God is uh, really not there for her. So again, as this difficult conversation for me, again, I'm just trying to listen, allow her to tell me her story, and not bombard her with all my opinions and everything. So this, of course, made me ask, what made you switch over from a believer to an atheist? She goes in to say that nothing really in particular happened. She was a couple years ago, she was traveling and she was meeting a lot of people, and that she realized that the belief system that she held dear to herself really meant nothing to people who were just a little away from her geographically. She said that there's people that had equally strong belief systems about their own gods and their religions. So it just got her thinking, and then she started reading and um, attending some kind of like free thinking seminars. So then she realized that religion is very geographic on just where you're at. If you're in the South, you're in the North, you're in the Pacific Northwest. It's all about geographic location. And so the more that she read and that she interacted with these free thinkers, the more she got exposed to her own critical thinking in these situations. And so this happened over a period of probably like 4 or 5 years, she said. So it wasn't just an overnight transition, but it just kind of happened over time. So I mean, of course, I mean, she said that she wanted to switch over, but I mean, I was like, did something just happen to make you switch from a religious person to an atheist? And of course, she said no. It was just kind of a phase that she was going through. She said, honestly, I don't really remember what triggered that phase, but there was a phase when I started asking questions and I didn't get the answers to the questions that I wanted. So when people are selling a particular product, they stand by the product. Surprisingly, in the case of religion, the minute you start asking questions, everybody kind of goes on their back foot. So that's really kind of what made her switch, which is a very interesting story. And again, throughout this, I mean, just being able to hear a different side of culture besides just Christianity, which I'm around, it's very interesting. So, of course, I want to get into the family aspect. So, do you come from a religious family? And she comes from a Sikh family, and her family is very religious. She said her husband, he's not really, but obviously her parents are still very religious, even now. So she said that we have to have a truce for many years, and my parents know that she's an atheist, so they don't really bother me, and I don't bother them. So it's kind of a thin line in their house that they try not to cross very often. So with this transition, I mean, you always want to know, how was the transition? Was there any difficulties transitioning? Because I mean, coming from a very religious family to coming to being an atheist, I mean, I had to be somewhat of a difficult transition, I would think. And so she said there was definitely some discomfort. I mean, you have loved ones who will not understand what you're going through, so you'll make them go through a phase of discomfort with you, and it's painful at time, because they don't really understand why you're doing what you're doing. So the obvious thoughts that would come to their mind were, the kid's lost it, she's gone into the wrong direction, she's into drugs, she's into alcohol. So if you decide to not to follow a religion, it's like they just suddenly thought that I was just this bad, terrible person. So it bothered me for a bit, she said. But most of my friends now are either atheists or agnostic. So I do have family members who are very orthodox even today, but they don't really bother me anymore with those questions. So now they know me enough to have to not really even bring up the conversation anymore. So the transition for her was pretty difficult in that regards. So coming up to the end of our conversation, so I said, do you think that this had anything to do with a midlife crisis? Because you're in your 40s, you're changing religions. And she said, no, midlife crisis is actually a lot of fun, she said. When you're in your 20s and early 30s, you're still getting out of your party phase. So when you get done with all that, and then you move into the more serious phase in life, so that's when you start asking the questions, reading the right books, philosophy, and those kind of things that you didn't really want to touch while you were in college or in high school. So you go back to those books now, she said, and so you start reading them again. You realize that there's a wealth of information out there. So she said that she wouldn't really call herself a seeker, but she was just looking for more meaning and needed more answers. But if I say I was a seeker, she said it's almost borderline being spiritual. So she said, don't call her a seeker. So she's just an atheist. So, of course, my last question, I said, so what is your purpose in life? Just because we all have a purpose. She said that her purpose is to have fun and to do as much as she can for others. I just want to have a meaningful life, but nothing beyond that. So there's no higher purpose or anything that she said. So through this, I definitely thought it was a great interview. I was able to express some of my views with her, and we were able to have a very good but difficult conversation through this interview. So I was able to learn a lot about my coworker and her side of her culture, from the Sikh aspect of her religious family and to her atheist / agnostic views of religion. So it was definitely a very difficult conversation, but we definitely learned a lot.